I felt zero guilt about my 2-year affair until my ex moved on and I lost everything trying to stop it. So Alex and I ended up in county lockup because apparently wanting to have an honest conversation with your ex-husband is considered assault now, which is just absolutely ridiculous if you ask me. But I'm getting ahead of myself here because the whole mess started way one night at Marcus's pathetic little apartment. We were together for 9 years total, 2 years dating and 7 married. And honestly, for the first few years, things were actually pretty decent. Marcus had this steady job at some logistics company. We'd bought our little house in Denver. And when Emily came along, then Sophia 2 years later, I thought we had this whole suburban family thing figured out. I was doing the stay-at-home mom routine, keeping the house clean, making sure the kids were fed and happy, all that domestic goddess stuff that everyone acts like is so easy, but actually takes a ton of work. Marcus would come home from his office job. We'd eat dinner together, watch some TV, put the kids to bed, and everything felt normal and stable. Not exciting, maybe, but solid. Then about 4 years into the marriage, Marcus's company decided to downsize or restructure or whatever corporate buzzword they used, and boom, he's unemployed. Just like that. No warning, no severance package worth mentioning. Just a pink slip and good luck figuring out how to pay the mortgage. I'm sitting there with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. No income coming in, watching this man I married turn into this mopey, defeated shell of himself. He'd spend half the day in his pajamas applying for jobs online, then the other half complaining about how unfair the job market was and how companies didn't value experience anymore. It was honestly pathetic. The worst part wasn't even the money stress, though that was definitely a problem. It was watching him just give up on being the man I thought I married. He'd shuffle around the house like some kind of sad ghost, barely helping with the kids, acting like the world owed him something just because he got laid off. I'm trying to keep 2 toddlers entertained and fed and clean while also dealing with his constant negativity and self-pity, and I started realizing that maybe I didn't actually know this person as well as I thought I did. When things got tough, he just crumbled instead of stepping up and handling business like an adult. He did eventually find another job after about 6 months of this nonsense, something similar at a different company. But by then, the damage was done. I looked at him differently now. The attraction was just gone, completely dead, like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. When he tried to initiate anything physical, I'd find excuses. Too tired? Kids might wake up not feeling well. Whatever worked. We went from having a normal intimate relationship to maybe once every few months. And honestly, even that felt like a chore I had to get through. Marcus kept trying to talk about what was wrong, wanting to have these deep conversations about our marriage and our connection and all this emotional stuff that just felt exhausting to me. He'd ask if I was happy, if there was something he could do differently, if I wanted to try counseling. And I'd just tell him everything was fine because what was the point? The truth was I didn't feel anything for him anymore. Not love, not attraction, barely even friendship. He'd become this needy, insecure version of himself. And I couldn't force myself to be attracted to that no matter how hard I tried. That's when I started spending more time at the gym, partly to get out of the house and partly because I needed something that made me feel good about myself. The kids were both in preschool by then, so I had a few hours during the day to actually focus on me for once. That's where I met Alex. And right away, I could tell he was different from Marcus in every possible way. He was confident, funny, had this edge to him that was actually exciting instead of draining. When he looked at me, I felt like he was seeing someone worth wanting, not just some wife and mother who was supposed to be grateful for whatever attention she got. We started talking after our workouts, then grabbing coffee, then meeting up outside the gym when we both had free time. Alex had this whole complicated situation with his ex and some legal stuff he was dealing with, but he was handling it instead of wallowing in self-pity like Marcus would have done. He told me straight up that he was interested in me, that he thought I was beautiful and smart and deserved better than whatever situation was making me look so unhappy all the time. It felt incredible to have someone actually see me as a person instead of just taking me for granted. The physical thing started maybe 2 months after we met. And I'm not going to pretend I felt guilty about it because I didn't. My marriage was already over in every way that mattered. We were just two people living in the same house, sharing expenses and childcare duties. Marcus and I barely talked about anything beyond logistics and the kids. We hadn't been intimate in months. I was 28 years old and I felt like I was dying inside from boredom and neglect. Alex made me feel alive again. Made me remember that I was still young and attractive and deserving of passion and excitement. This went on for almost 2 years, and honestly, it was the happiest I'd been since before Emily was born. Alex and I would meet up whenever we could manage it, and those few hours every week were like this secret escape from my regular life. He'd tell me about his plans for the future, his business ideas, how he wanted to travel and actually live instead of just existing in some suburban routine. We'd talk about what it would be like if we could be together for real without having to sneak around and pretend. Meanwhile, things at home just kept getting worse. Marcus could obviously tell something was different, but instead of actually doing something about it, he'd just make these passive-aggressive comments about how I seemed distant or how I was spending a lot of time at the gym. He'd try to plan date nights or suggest we take little weekend trips and I'd go along with it because I had to. But it felt like playing house with someone I barely knew anymore. He'd hold my hand during movies or try to kiss me goodnight and I'd have to fight not to pull away because it felt so wrong. The breaking point came when Marcus finally worked up the nerve to actually say what we'd both been thinking for months. We were cleaning up after dinner. Kids were watching cartoons in the living room. And he just blurted out that maybe we should think about getting divorced. He said it like he was expecting me to be shocked or upset, like he thought I'd fight for our marriage or beg him to reconsider. Instead, I felt this huge wave of relief because finally, someone was being honest about what the situation actually was. If you think that's the way, that's fine, I told him. And I could see him deflate a little bit because he was probably hoping I'd put up some kind of fight. But why would I? We were both miserable. The kids were picking up on the tension. We were basically roommates who happened to share some children and a mortgage. He kept pushing, asking if there was something specific that made me want this, if there was something we could work on. And I just told him it had nothing to do with him specifically. I didn't need to bother explaining myself when the situation was so obviously beyond repair. When he brought up the kids, I told him they'd be better off with divorced parents rather than two parents who didn't love each other. And that was absolutely true. Emily was already asking why Mommy and Daddy never hugged anymore, why we didn't laugh together like her friends' parents did. Kids aren't stupid. They can sense when something's wrong, and pretending everything was fine wasn't protecting them from anything. 2 weeks later, I had the papers drawn up and served to him at his office. I know that sounds harsh, but honestly, I needed him to understand that this wasn't some emotional decision I might change my mind about. This was business, and we needed to handle it like adults instead of dragging it out with a bunch of drama and second-guessing. His co-workers seeing it happen wasn't my main concern. I was thinking about efficiency and making sure he took the whole thing seriously. But then Marcus started acting like a child about the whole thing, refusing to sign the papers and telling his lawyer he wanted to work things out. For over a week, he kept calling and texting, asking me to just talk to him to explain what had gone wrong, to give him a chance to fix whatever I thought was broken. I kept telling him to just sign the damn papers so we could move forward with custody arrangements and dividing up our stuff, but he was being completely stubborn about it. That's when Alex decided to handle the situation himself, which honestly I appreciated because someone needed to get through to Marcus that this wasn't some game where he could stall until I came to my senses. Alex went to Marcus's work and had a conversation with him in the parking lot. Basically explaining that I had moved on and it was time for Marcus to accept reality. He told him to let me go, that I had chosen to be with someone else and that dragging out the divorce wasn't going to change anything. That same night, Marcus came home with this whole different energy, and I knew immediately that Alex had gotten through to him. He didn't ask me to sit down or suggest we talk privately or any of his usual careful approaches. He just looked at me and said, "So, you're having an affair with someone named Alex?" It wasn't even a question. He said it like he was stating a fact, which I guess he was. I didn't see any point in denying it or making up some story about how it wasn't what it looked like. The whole situation was already out in the open, and honestly, I was relieved that we could finally stop pretending. I told him yes. I had been seeing someone else and that it had been going on for a while because our marriage had been dead for years and we both knew it. I wasn't apologetic about it because I didn't feel like I owed him an apology for finding happiness somewhere else when he basically checked out of our relationship after he lost his job. Marcus just stared at me for a long time and then he said, "Okay, I'll sign the papers tomorrow." That was it. No yelling, no accusations, no dramatic scene, just acceptance of what the situation actually was, which was honestly more mature than I'd expected from him. The divorce went through pretty smoothly after that. We agreed on 50-50 custody. He refinanced the house to give me his share of the equity so I could keep it, and he found himself a decent apartment across town. Alex moved in with me and the kids about a month after everything was finalized. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually living my life instead of just going through the motions. Things were great for several months. Alex was amazing with Emily and Sophia, much more fun and engaged than Marcus had ever been. He'd take them to the park, help them with art projects, actually play with them instead of just supervising them like Marcus always did. The kids adjusted to the new living situation pretty well. And when they'd come back from weekends at their dad's place, they'd tell me about the movies they watched and the restaurants they went to, normal divorced family stuff. Then Marcus started posting pictures on Facebook that made me realize he was moving on a lot faster than I'd expected him to. The first set of photos showed him at some family restaurant with Emily and Sophia. But there was also this woman sitting next to Sophia, some blonde coworker of his named Rebecca. The pictures were obviously taken by someone else. And while they weren't doing anything inappropriate, there was something about the whole setup that felt deliberate, like he was making sure people knew he was spending time with an attractive woman. I'm not going to lie, seeing those photos pissed me off more than I thought they would. Not because I wanted Marcus back or anything like that, but because it felt like he was trying to prove some kind of point, like he was showing everyone that he was fine without me, that he could find someone better, that the divorce was actually a good thing for him. It was petty and transparent, and I couldn't believe he was involving our kids in whatever weird game he was playing. A few weeks later, he posted more pictures from what looked like the same restaurant, same woman, same setup. This time, Rebecca was helping Sophia color on one of those kids' menus, and Marcus had his arm around the back of Emily's chair in a way that made it look like they were all one big happy family. I texted him that night and told him this whole thing was getting pretty petty. And he had the nerve to text back asking what I was talking about. Like he didn't know exactly what he was doing. "This is getting old, you know," I told him. And he responded with some about how he was just living his life and spending time with friends. But I wasn't born yesterday. I could see what this was. He was trying to make me jealous, trying to show me what I was missing. And he was doing a terrible job at it because Rebecca was clearly just some rebound situation that wasn't going to last. The whole thing came to a head when Rebecca posted something on her own Facebook for her birthday and there was Marcus in the background of one of the photos looking genuinely happy in a way that I hadn't seen from him in years. They were at her house with what looked like her family and friends, and he fit right in like he'd been part of their group forever. Emily and Sophia were there, too, playing with some other kids. And the whole scene looked so natural and comfortable that it actually made me angry. Alex saw the post, too, and he was even more irritated about it than I was. He said Marcus was obviously trying to play mind games, using our kids as props to make it look like he'd upgraded to some better situation. The more we talked about it, the more obvious it became that someone needed to have a direct conversation with Marcus about what he thought he was accomplishing with this whole performance. So, we drove over to his apartment complex that night, and Alex brought along this metal pipe he kept in his truck for protection, just in case Marcus tried to get aggressive or kick us out before we could explain why his behavior was affecting our kids and needed to stop. We weren't planning to hurt anybody. We just wanted to make sure he took the conversation seriously instead of trying to blow us off or act like he didn't understand what the problem was. But as soon as we got to his door, Marcus started acting like we were there to attack him or something. Alex was trying to explain the situation, telling him that involving our kids in his dating life was inappropriate and that posting all these pictures was clearly meant to cause drama. Marcus kept backing away and talking over him, not letting him finish his points. And when Alex stepped forward to try to get his attention, Marcus started yelling about calling the police. The whole thing escalated so fast that I barely had time to process what was happening. Alex was getting frustrated because Marcus wouldn't listen, and Marcus was acting like we were some kind of criminals instead of concerned parents trying to have a conversation about our children's well-being. Before I knew it, there were sirens outside, and suddenly we're both getting arrested because some neighbor called the cops over what should have been a private family discussion. Now we're both sitting in jail facing all these ridiculous charges. They're trying to say Alex assaulted Marcus with a weapon, and they're charging me with obstruction and battery on law enforcement, which is completely insane because all I did was try to explain to the officers that they were misunderstanding the situation. Alex is looking at multiple felonies because apparently his legal troubles from a few years ago make him some kind of repeat offender. Even though this whole thing was basically a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. The worst part is that Marcus is using this whole situation to try to get full custody of Emily and Sophia, claiming that Alex is dangerous and that I'm an unfit mother for having him around the kids. His lawyer is apparently confident they can get the custody arrangement changed, which means I might lose my children because their father couldn't handle a simple conversation about boundaries without turning it into some kind of federal case. I keep thinking about how different things could have been if Marcus had just been reasonable from the beginning. If he'd signed the divorce papers when I asked him to. If he hadn't tried to make me jealous with his obvious rebound relationship. If he'd listened when we came to talk to him instead of immediately assuming the worst and calling the police. But that's typical Marcus. He's always been dramatic about everything. Always had to be the victim in every situation. Alex and I are both looking at serious jail time now. And for what? Because we tried to protect our family from someone who was clearly trying to cause problems and manipulate our kids for his own ego. The whole system is just completely backwards. They're treating us like criminals while Marcus gets to play the innocent victim and probably get exactly what he wanted all along, which was to punish me for leaving him and finding someone better. My lawyer says the prosecution has a pretty strong case because of the witness statements and the fact that Alex had the pipe with him. But she's going to try to argue that we were just concerned parents who got caught up in a misunderstanding. She thinks I might be able to get the charges reduced if I cooperate and distance myself from Alex. But honestly, why should I throw him under the bus when he was just trying to stand up for our family? The whole thing is just proof that Marcus never really changed after all these years. He's still the same passive-aggressive person who can't handle conflict directly, who has to manipulate situations to get what he wants instead of just being honest about his intentions. He knew exactly what he was doing with those Facebook posts. Knew exactly how it would affect me and the kids. And when we tried to address it like adults, he turned it into this whole dramatic production that's probably going to destroy our lives. But I guess that's what happens when you try to do the right thing in a world where people like Marcus get rewarded for playing victim while people like Alex and me get punished for actually caring enough to take action. The kids are the ones who are really going to suffer from all this. And that's what makes me the angriest about the whole situation. They're going to grow up thinking their mother is some kind of criminal instead of understanding that everything I did was to try to build a better life for our family.